Welcome to The Daily with me, Niall Paterson, and today we return to Hawaii. A week of the worst wildfires the US has seen in more than a century has left vast swathes of Maui little more than ash. When viewed from the air, it's no longer an island paradise. Instead, a patchwork of blackened, burnt-out buildings more akin to a war-torn third-world country than the first-world Eden it once was. On the ground, the search efforts continue. Homes are marked with an orange X if they've been searched. HR is etched on them if human remains have been found. At the time of recording, 99 people are known to have died. The true total is surely far higher. And yes, the fires do now appear mostly under control, but the devastation of the last week will persist for years to come. The governor of Hawaii says there's been more than $5.5 billion worth of damage. The human cost is, frankly, inestimable. All the while, the people of Hawaii ask one simple question: just how was this allowed to happen? Well, our US correspondent Martha Kelner has been there, pretty much from the beginning. Martha, just take us to that moment when you arrived in Hawaii.
Just immediately arriving at the airport, it was this sense that this was a big disaster. Everywhere you looked, people were sleeping on the airport concourse, people with stories that were horrific. It made it very clear that this was a major disaster. We spoke as soon as we arrived to a man called Brian and his daughter Kiara, and they'd been evacuated from a hotel which was around 3 miles from the epicenter of this fire. And I think Kiara put it best when she said it was like a bomb went off. She said that they were driving through streets that just a few days before they'd been enjoying shaved ice, which is sort of a Hawaiian dessert, and it had been beautiful, and they'd been enjoying this stunning island and this amazing town of Lahaina. And then just a couple of nights later, they were driving through what they described as a war zone.
We were pretty isolated, kind of had no idea what was going on because we had, no cell service, no TV, no internet. All we could see was sort of the smoke and the horizon.
It was scary seeing, driving through, you couldn't see any structures of the buildings. All the cars with full gas tanks that reached the fire, they were exploded.
It was the next day that I was able to see with my own eyes just how awful the scene in Lahaina, which is the worst affected town. The authorities had sealed off access to the town of Lahaina, so the only way to view the devastation was from the air. And so myself and my team, we went up in a helicopter, and I've never been to Hawaii before, and it was the first time I'd seen the true natural beauty of this place. So you're flying over lush green mountains, past these picture postcard beaches, and then all of a sudden you round the corner and that green land turns into black charred ground, and then all of a sudden you see the mounds of wreckage which used to be the town of Lahaina. And even from what sort of a few hundred feet in the air, you could smell this acrid smoke catching in the back of your throat. And I guess that was the point when I realized the enormity of the situation and the loss of life and the loss of place and loss of memories too.
And that, of course, was the best part of a week ago now, Martha, and you have been working pretty much flat out on this ever since. I should say to those listening to the podcast that you're speaking to us from the back of the car with the lip mic, having just finished another day of covering this story. Give us an idea then of how much of Hawaii is now being directly affected by these fires.
The fires are mainly centred on Maui, although there were outbreaks of fires a week ago on the Big Island as well. But certainly Maui is deeply, deeply affected by this. This is not just a tragedy in the sense of the loss of life, which of course is the primary focus here. It's also a tragedy in the loss of livelihoods too, particularly with the tourism industry. I think 13, 14 million people a year travel here. At any one time, there's, just slightly less than 100,000 tourists on the island. And all of that has basically stopped overnight. So this is, a big impact. And there's still 3 different areas on Maui Island which are still burning, not just Lahaina, which was the epicenter of these fires, but there's 2 other places too where the fires are burning. And Firefighters have been working flat out for the past 7 days now, trying to contain these fires. I can only imagine what a grim and grueling task that it's been. But in terms of the sort of danger of the fires, that acute danger to human life seems to have passed now.
How would you assess the quality of the evacuation process? I mean, I've been reading stories about people trapped in their homes. I've been hearing stories about people having to flee into the ocean to escape the fires.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions to be answered about the response of authorities on Maui, both before, during, and after this disaster. You mentioned people being caught unaware, and that is a story that I've been hearing since day one repeatedly. People saying they simply did not have enough time, did not have sufficient warning to escape. I've spoken to people who were caught in their homes, who didn't know what was happening until the flames were basically upon them.
The second I saw that all the houses near us were on fire, I could immediately tell how bad it was. So it was pretty intense. You just see everybody running for their lives, people crying, people handing their babies to other people. The smoke got so intense, we didn't know where to go. The 911 didn't even, know where to send people.
I've spoken to maybe half a dozen people who had to run down to the ocean to escape the ferocity of the flames. And all of these people, to a man, say that they had no idea that this was coming. They didn't receive any evacuation order. Hawaii has one of the most sophisticated outdoor warning systems in the world. They boast about this system. They have 80 sirens just on Maui, which each of them is supposed to be as loud as a rock concert. Yet on Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, they remained completely silent. And I think that is the biggest question from all of this. It's the thing that I keep getting asked over and over again. Why on earth did that alert system not sound when it was specifically designed for this sort of scenario? And the authorities say to that, well, we sent out text messages, we issued warnings on TV and radio, but the town of Lahaina, the worst affected area, had already lost power way before that. So the people who lived there, most of them didn't receive any warning at all.
I mean, remind me, wasn't Hawaii the place which accidentally sent all residents a text message alerting them to an impending missile attack meant a few years back, but they weren't able to communicate to the people of Hawaii, enough about the risks of these fires, to the extent that, you have people bobbing around in the ocean for hours because they could not have survived on land.
Exactly. And what people keep pointing out here is that these alarm systems are tested. Once every month, the alarm system goes off. Why on earth could that not have happened in this real life scenario? The first day that we went down to one of the evacuation shelters, we spoke to two gentlemen called Damon and Idris.
We keep hearing explosions. We were hearing screams out of a horror movie.
And they were telling us this incredibly horrific story about being caught in their homes and having to run down to the sea, to jump in the sea. And they spent 6 hours in the ocean.
It's black, the ocean was pulling us at the same time. We're trying to had debris falling on us. We're trying to get wet and not burn. I just prayed and I said, God, please not today. I didn't know what to say. This is it.
People were really left to fend for themselves. And I think that is the primary source of anger and frustration here.
I don't even know if I want to ask this, but if the fit and the healthy are having to flee into the ocean to keep themselves away from the flames, I wonder about the older residents on Maui.
Yeah, and in fact, there was a retirement village in the town of Lahaina. We don't know whether people made it out of there. There was an old people's home too, and I spoke to one lady who had also had to run into the ocean to escape the flames. Her face was covered with burns from embers that had fallen on her face while she was in the sea. And she was telling me the most heartrending story, that she had an elderly neighbour and she'd walked him down to the sea and she'd managed to get him to sit on the rocks that were near the rocks that were sort of near the harbour area. And she said embers from the fire kept falling on his shirt, and they would set his shirt alight, and she'd pat him down to try make the flames go out, but he just was not strong enough to go into the sea. And she was incredibly emotional as she told the story of how she'd had to watch her neighbour die. And she quite understandably was saying, how could this have happened? Why was I in the position where I didn't get a text message? I didn't get any alert. And instead I had to watch my friends and neighbours take their last breath. And I think that sort of sums up just how unprepared people in Lahaina were for the ferocity of these fires. And I think asking the question, should the authorities have done better here?
Some heart-wrenching stories from Martha there. After the break, we'll be hearing from the people who live on Maui and exactly how they are planning to rebuild their island home. It is in the darkness of events such as we are witnessing in Hawaii at the moment that you do see the very best of humanity. Tell me just a little bit about the way in which this community has come together. Those that could help have been helping, haven't they?
In Hawaii, they have the word ohana, which means family, but it doesn't just mean blood relatives. It means this big, extensive network that almost encompasses everyone on the island. And in that, there's this inherent need and want to look after those around you. And I've seen that everywhere. The network of volunteers that have sprung into action here has been quite amazing.
All I want to do is help people. I'm just so grateful to be alive. People are found in houses in a huddle, holding each other because the fire surrounded their homes before they could even get out. There was nowhere to go. And these are beautiful homes that are very old and they're made of wood. Those went up like a matchstick. Nobody had warning.
Some of the survivors in the worst affected areas are saying that they don't have enough government help, that instead they're being forced to rely on this network of volunteers. But there is a ready supply, certainly, of things like clothes, non-perishable food, nappies, people all binding together to try and help the worst affected areas recover.
But the grim reality of it, surely, Martha, is whilst fires continue to burn, whilst villages and towns are in ashes, are still smouldering, we probably do not yet have a clear idea of just how many lives have been lost.
The search through the wreckage is an incredibly complicated and grim task, and they've brought in sniffer dogs from other islands in Hawaii. They've now got 20 sniffer dogs. They say they've searched 25% of the ruins of Lahaina. They found the human remains of 99 people who have lost their lives so far. This search could take weeks, and the governor of Hawaii, Josh Green, says it's impossible to predict at the moment just what the eventual total number of fatalities will be. But I think it's safe to say that there will be well over 100 people dead as a result of this. It's already the worst wildfire in the United States in more than a century. Families of the missing are being asked to bring DNA samples to a family assistance centre, and it's through those DNA samples that loved ones will be identified. When we're talking about fires, finding whole bodies is very unlikely. This is about identifying human remains.
Martha, you've already mentioned the fact that, I don't want to call it a blame game, but clearly people there and people elsewhere will be looking for answers as to why this happened. We've mentioned Lahaina a few times now, and as I understand it, in Hawaiian, that means cruel or merciless sun. This is a part of the world in which wildfires are not unknown. If a finger of blame is being pointed by people there, in which direction right now?
Yeah, they have wildfires regularly here, and so it's not unusual. I think as the days have gone on since these wildfires, the search for answers and accountability has definitely intensified. I think people are most keen to find the answers to that. I've also been speaking to firefighters on the island who are saying that when these flames were at their most ferocious, when they were battling to save properties and save lives, their fire hydrants were running out of water. They were first losing pressure and then they were running dry entirely. And I spoke to one gentleman who had to defend his own house. You know, he tried first of all to put out the fire with a garden hose, but then that ran out of water. And so he runs around his house desperately searching for anything.
It's a kind of disconcerting feeling when the fire guys show up and they don't have water. And that's what happened was they would spray water, which was great, and then they'd run out and then they'd have to leave. And so I'm running around, I'm grabbing water out of the base of my kid's basketball hoop. I was grabbing water out of the toilet. I was grabbing water out of my Brita filter in the refrigerator that doesn't work anymore.
That was the level of desperation and the lack of basic things that you need to fight a fire. So I think there's a question about why, when Western Maui in particular was designated as a high risk fire zone, the authorities knew about that. Why wasn't there more preparedness? Maybe the fingers at the moment are being pointed at state level, at the governor, Josh Green. There's also questions for Hawaii Electric, which is the utility company on the island, suggestions that it may have been downed power lines as a result of the hurricane force winds that were coming through that caused these fires. Also questions about why Hawaii Electric didn't turn off the power, because people think that may have intensified these blazes too. So I think probably fingers pointed at the authorities and at Hawaiian Electric. I think we'll see that all play out in the days and weeks to come.
Just in terms of the rebuilding, the reconstruction, and we are talking whilst fires are still ongoing. Do you think it's possible to rebuild this place?
I think definitely in its old form, it probably is irrecoverable. The whole place is razed to the ground. I saw that for myself. Nothing really is untouched. There's the odd building where the structure is still there. One of those, the bar that is owned by Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac, his restaurant bar is still structurally there, but inside it is, I would say, completely irrecoverable. Speaking to people on the island, you know, they point out Lahaina is not just a tourist town. It's not just even a home to the people who live there. It's this place of great historical significance to Hawaii. It's the former royal capital. It's where the art galleries were, the museums, the libraries, and everyone you speak to say it was just this special spiritual place. Some people are worried that the charred ground of Lahaina will be seen almost as a golden goose to outdoor land developers, that they will move in, buy up the land, and it will become, you know, these big luxury resorts that are all over the rest of Hawaii. Everyone I speak to from Lahaina says that absolutely cannot be allowed to happen. Mick Fleetwood said to me it would be abhorrent if that was allowed to happen.
The thought of it becoming some form of playground with no reference to the dignity of that town would be, to me, would be abhorrent, and I don't think that will happen for one moment.
So I think while a total rebuild will take place, I think the overwhelming hope here is that it's something that honours the memory of what Lahaina originally was.
Yeah, I mean, the word paradise is often overused, isn't it, Martha, particularly in our trade, but it does sound like Lahaina was just that, a paradise.
Yeah, it looked, it's hard to imagine when you're walking down those streets and you're just seeing mounds of twisted metal and dust, when you're seeing these cars completely hollowed out, and even in the sea, you know, boats that had been overturned that were completely, you know, black with the charred smoke. It's hard to imagine what that once was. But then you speak to people, and I spoke to people returning to Lahaina for the first time, and they were explaining to me what it meant to them. I spoke to one woman who stood in the middle of these ruins and pointed out all of her favourite places. You know, she said, that's the place I go to get ice cream. That's the library. That's the place I went on my first date with my boyfriend. Another man who said, you know, that's the place where my 5-year-old goes to school. And they talk about somewhere where everyone knew everyone. They say if you knew one person in Lahaina, you knew everyone. So yeah, I think Lahaina was a paradise, and I think that's, you know, a big part of this tragedy, obviously secondary to the enormous loss of life.
And that's your lot for this edition of The Daily. We'll see you next time.